Alright, is it possible to find the value of secant theta while knowing the value of tangent theta, and to explain? So let's say we knew tangent theta was something. Could we figure out secant theta? And this is kind of a poorly worded question. They really need to put in the directions that in a right triangle, because in a right triangle this is going to be true, but not true or false in not a right triangle. You should say true, because in this chapter it's only looking at right triangle trig, so I guess in that sense it's assuming you're considering right triangles only. But the way this works, so let's just make up something, maybe 3/4. If you knew this, could we find that? Well, secant from SOHCAHTOA, cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So secant would be hypotenuse over adjacent. And I could take this information, I could plug it into a right triangle. I could label the opposite as 3 and the adjacent as 4, and then I could use Pythagorean theorem to figure out the third side. And then once I had that, this theta is the same as this theta. So now hypotenuse over adjacent for theta would be 5/3. So it looks like having this information, I was able to determine that information. So one more thing I do want to add about this question before you move on. If you thought about this question a little bit deeper and you were thinking that it was false, I would actually probably agree with you. So they kind of skim over this. Another thing the question should say, in addition to it being a right triangle, is that the angle is in the first quadrant. If the angle is in the first quadrant, then it is true. And I know that's what the textbook company expects you to do, because I'm looking at their answer, and that's what you get. But the reason why it could be false given that information is tangent's not just 3/4 in quadrant 1. Tangent could also be 3/4 in quadrant 3. Notice my adjacent over my, or opposite over adjacent, simplifies to 3/4. So this theta still has the same tangent. And if I did Pythagorean theorem here, this would be 5. Hypotenuse is always positive. And then secant would be hypotenuse over adjacent, so 5/-4. Now back here, 3 was the opposite, 4 was the adjacent. Sorry. So it could be that secant is -5/4, or it could be +5/4, depending on what quadrant you're in. So technically, the way they worded the question, if you really think of all the possible cases, the answer should be false, because I don't know what secant is. I don't know if secant's positive or negative based on the information they gave to you. But if you assume it's a right triangle and you assume the right triangle is in quadrant 1, then the answer would be true.